Good afternoon and welcome to SnapTech IT's monthly webinar. My name is Ted Hulsey. I'm Chief Revenue Officer for SnapTech IT. Thanks for joining in for the live session today. This webinar will be recorded and circulated to all registrants. The topic for today is how I would hack you, Confessions of an Ethical Hacker. My guest is James Carroll. James is the founder and a principal at Hackett Cyber. He's a professionally trained ethical hacker and pen tester. When not hacking into his clients' networks, James is a frequent speaker and trainer at cybersecurity industry events. He also speaks frequently at industry events with non-technical senior management and leaders. James, it's great to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, we're excited for today's conversation. I do want to remind everybody who's joined us live today, please submit your questions as we go along, and we'll try to address them on the fly. We've got quite a bit of content to cover. We will have a formal Q&A section at the end of today's session, but please, if you've got questions as we go, just drop them into the Q&A function on GoToWebinar. So I'm going to hand the ball to James so that he can present from his machine. And James, you should be the presenter now.
All right, let me get this queued up. Ted, one thing we were both really good at is we get really good at this whole tech thing, like sharing the screens and stuff.
let's fingers crossed. I don't see your screen yet. So.
Oh wait, hold on now.
All right. Yes. Okay.
I almost jinxed
Good.
it.
Well, you did jinx it. So let's go. But I can see it just fine. So You're good to go. All right.
Sweet. We'll get this party started then. Thanks again for having me. I'm James. I'm the co-founder of Hackett Cyber. Got a really good presentation that Ted always says this is one of my favorite ones. It's called How I Hacked You. And kind of when I developed a lot of this content, it was basically I had people keep asking me, like, well, what's like the most common ways you hack into a business? Like you meet someone on the street at a bar at an event, and they're like, okay, tell me, James, like how would you hack me? And at one point you get asked this so much, you're just like, I'm just going to make a presentation for it so people stop asking me. So that was the original drive for me to do this was let's answer every question everyone's ever asked me throughout my decade-long ethical hacking pen testing adventure and put it all into a slideshow. So keep that in mind when we're going through this. So quick introductions. I'm James. On the right there, that is the human resource officer at Hackett Cyber. That is Duke. He's our resident golden doodle here. He might bark. I don't think he's going to bark today because all the mail already came. So I think we're good. FedEx came, Amazon came. I don't think there's anything else coming. So he might not make an appearance, but if he does, I always like to introduce him first because it's rude if you don't. And I always get asked, how did I get started hacking? Well, it originated really in 2005, 2006 with a game. And it was funny because I was talking to one of my friends about this the other day. He's like, remember when we used to play Halo together? And I'm like, yeah, it's actually how I started hacking. I started playing a game called Halo 2. So this game was it's a first-person shooter. It was really popular. I think the new one's like Halo Infinite. So if you have kids or if you're a gamer, there's a version of this game out now. But back then, it was made for the Xbox. Me and all my friends in school, we'd go to school, we'd come home, and the first thing we do is we'd get on Halo and we'd start playing. And you'd play online against people all over the world. And the goal of the game is, right, if you win, you go up in rank. And if you go up in rank, then you look cooler, right? You get more girls in school. That's the really obvious things. So me, it was like I want to get to the highest rank, which is level 50. I want to get to the highest rank as fast as possible. The issue I had was I wasn't really that great at the game. So I remember doing some Google searching, just some real basic stuff, and I found this forum called 7 Sins, and I'm looking through it, and this guy's like, how to always win in Halo. I'm like, I'm interested, sign me up. And he goes through this pretty lengthy forum post, but easy to understand about how he figured out how you could turn off people's internet. So now that attack, as I know, is called the denial service attack, which is a felony. Back then, I don't think it was a felony. At least I hope it wasn't a felony. But we started doing it, and what I figured out was like, hey, if I match a game with like 10 people, I can turn their internet off. When I turn their internet off, they quit out, I automatically win. So that's really how I started getting into it. And to me, the craziest part or the most fascinating part was that, here I am, a 15, 16-year-old kid, and I could do this. And it's like, wow, this is crazy. Like I just followed an online article, like some of the tools we used back then were like Zone Alarm Pro, Cane Enable, which are like old school. Cane Enable is like a really old school Windows hacking tool, but it was just really really fast and kind of exciting. Like that, you're like, wow, I could figure out how to do this. So that's where my roots started. Now, we don't do any of that. Everything's legal, white box hacking for companies to try to break in and help them secure their perimeter and their endpoints and their customer data and things like that. All right, switching gears, I always like going over some of the current events that we see as hackers. And one of my favorite sites for this is one that's called Darkfeed. Darkfeed is basically they monitor all of the ransomware, cyber criminal websites, and they post when people are breached. I started looking at this about 6 months ago, and every day I get about a dozen emails of different companies that get breached. And to me, it's really interesting to see like the different size and vertical and location of it. It's also very interesting when you get an email about a company got breached that's like 15 miles from you. So that happened recently. I'm like, oh wow, I didn't know they got hacked. What you learn after a short period of time is you'll get emails about big companies getting hacked, and you'll never see it on the news. You'll never see it published. And it's like, just goes to show the stuff you see on the news and the hacks in the news is the tip of the iceberg. Most places don't report breaches. On the right here, this is a 2022 statistic that Darkfeed put together of all the different companies that got hacked. And you can see on the chart in the top, each one of those bars is a different threat actor group. So Lockbit hacked over 1,200 people that was reported in 2022. Conti ransomware, which was huge, was just about 700 affected hacks. Down under that is the most the ransomware attacks that demanded the most money. So Lycra, J. Irwin, Ryan Holmes, right? Millions, Accenture, a $44 billion hack. So these are big time hacks from big time companies. And it just if you can go on there and check out some of the hacks, but you'll see it's not just the big guys that get hacked. It's 3-person CPA firms. It's small law firms, right? This was one I did. I'm like, well, let's see how many CPA firms get hacked in 2022. And you can see there's a good amount that get hacked, right? And there's just as many law firms and there's just as many, window glass shops and small offices that get hacked. And I mean, I didn't believe it. Some people are like, well, how do you know it's real? Well, I can see it's Holland CPA. They got hacked. I can go on Holland CPA's website and I can go on their site and then download all their data. So you can actually this is available to anybody in the world that once they hack you, they publish your data on the internet. Anyone can go to these sites and download customer company data. It's crazy. It's scary, but this is the world we live in. This stuff happens every single day. And part of what we do is when people get hacked, like, hey, can you go download the data, see what's on there so we know who to report or who we need to report to. And you never want to get to that point. That's what you want to avoid. So that's really the goal of a lot of the work that we do is to say, hopefully you never get there. Another one was a law firm. I'm just showing you some examples. This is actually how, and one of the later slides in this presentation shows how to actually view the data on the top there, that really long URL. That's what hyperlinks and websites look like on the dark web. Is there these long random URLs that end in .onion. So this is using Tor, which is a dark web browser. And you can actually go and then see the data that basically download any data. And you can see the attacker was said there's 200 gigs of data here, emails and client information. He's publishing more. So yeah, before, it was you get hacked. Well, they just want a $500 ransom. Now if you get hacked, they want a $1 million ransom. And then if you don't pay them, they're going to publish all your data on the internet, which you never want happening. This was one of the, when I put together slides, I always like looking at different breaches that happened recently. And this one was one that really caught my attention. It was an insurance company called MetaBank, and they got hacked. I think it was Conti ransomware that hacked them. And, people, the press was like, did you get hacked? Did you get hacked? Finally, the CEO came out on a live press conference and he was berating the hackers, like taunting them. And the hackers were like, not sure if you noticed or not, but we have all your data and we have access to your network. So they published this post on their website, like, hey, just so you know, our next act is you better start selling some MetaBank stocks because it's not going to look good. So they actually published a list, in their insurance company of all the abortions and the abortion cases in different insurance claims that they had for the last 10 years, and said, hey, we're going to publish this now. And when you release this to countries like China, right, or countries where abortion probably, it's looked down upon, this becomes dangerous. So they weren't playing around. And MetaBank, I don't know where it ended up now, but it wasn't good. And this just, if there's one lesson learned here, if you do get hacked, something happens, don't taunt the hackers. They're usually not good people to taunt. You want to comply, right? Another one, right? This is just a screenshot of some more data. TaxNet USA, online tax company. Ted, I was talking to Ted earlier. He knows how much I love taxes, so we wanted to focus on this in the presentation. But they'll publish any and all data they get access to. CDP, or this was CareFirst CHPDC, right? Another one. You can see that's a balance sheet on the right, the files to download, and this is what the pages look like. Like anyone can go in here, hit download, boom. Now you got a bunch of data. So the goal is you don't want that. You don't want, instead of saying CareFirst Community Health Plan, you want it to be your company name there and your data on the bottom or on the right-hand side. That is what we want to avoid. All right, the two different types of hacks. So, what we talk about a lot during our presentations is there's hacks that take advantage of people and hacks that take advantage of systems. And, just from an attacker, and been doing this for the last decade, I can tell you that people hacks are far more common. They're far easier, and the reason for that is because people have something computers don't have, and that's emotions. You can exploit emotions. Computers, for the most part, are pretty binary. It's an allow or deny. It's a 1 or a 0. I can't call a computer and try to convince it to send me a password. I can't call a computer and say, hey, can you let me on site? You can call people and you can exploit people that way. Hackers know that. And that's why people are so heavily exploited, for almost every hack that we've ever seen. So how do people get hacked? The obvious is social engineering. Social engineering is huge. Phishing, right? And I'm sure a lot of people in here know what phishing is. That's emails trying to get you to do something, download a link, open a file, send someone a password. Pretexting and vishing, right? That's phone calls. So I probably have about 4 of these in my voicemail right now, but the IRS phone calls where someone calls you and says you owe 25 grand in back taxes, and if you don't pay it by the end of the week, you're going to go to jail. Those are typical of phishing attacks. Baiting, which is taking flash drives, putting malware on them, leaving them places, and we've actually seen this happen. What criminals will do is they'll go to Times Square in New York City, take 50 flash drives, put malware on them, leaving on the street or in a shared office, a common space for an office building. And what people love to do is they'll take that flash drive, they pick it up, and they're dying to know what's on it. They'll get to their office, and the first thing they'll do is they'll plug into their computer. Usually that contains like a Word document that might say like company financials or personal financials. You open that, it's got a macro, you enable that, and then your computer becomes infected, the network becomes infected. And then of course, physically breaking into buildings, which we honestly do a lot of, which is tailgating or somehow trying to find our way past physical security defenses with the goal of compromising that network. And we hear this a lot as cybersecurity professionals is people are your weakest link. The reason we hear it a lot is because it's true. It's overplayed, but it's true. People are the weakest link, and you need to help protect your people. First and foremost, they're the first and last layer of defense for any company. All right, so anatomy of a hack. How does a hack occur? Well, there's different phases that I like to break this out into. Phase 1 is open source intelligence gathering. This is essentially cyber stalking. I don't know. I think it's still on Netflix. There's a show called You, and I can't remember, something Goldberg was the main character's name, but my wife was watching it, and I'm like, this is a great example of OSSCENT. Like, this is the perfect example, because what he does is he finds women, he goes on their Instagram, their Facebook, finds out what they're interested in, where they go, what they frequent, and then he befriends them. And that's the perfect example of how OSSCENT can be used. He uses it to kill people, but we don't obviously do that. We use it to hack people. Once you gain information about your target, whether that's your company or your person, you want to try to gain network access. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. Once you gain network access, you want to gain user access. And sometimes phase 2 and 3 can flip-flop, right? You might gain user access first and gain network access. But once you gain one of those two, you're most often going to find that you can gain admin access. And once you gain admin access, you're good to go. There's not a whole lot more that you need to do to, whether you want to compromise a database or a file or, source code. Admin access will more often than not get you to that place. So what is OSSCENT? there's a lot of different definitions coined by it, but the DoD has really one of the most original ones, and it's publicly available information. And nowadays with social media, publicly available information, there's a lot of that. 15, 20 years ago, not so much. But I mean, attackers use this all the time. I mean, we use this all the time. Social media is huge. LinkedIn, MySpace, Facebook. I mean, there's social media sites out now that the young kids are using that I've never even heard of, and that we'll stumble across. And I'm like, hey, have you ever heard of this before? To some of my younger employees, and like, yeah, I use that all the time. Like, I've never heard of VSCO or some of this other stuff that the kids are using now. Club Penguin, I don't know what it is, but people use it. And there's tons of sites. It's not just the big three. I mean, there's Reddit, there's Pinterest, there's Ask.fm, there's Vimeo, there's Google Plus. I mean, there's tons of different social media sites out there that attackers will use to leverage, not just against you personally, but against your company, because people work for companies, right? A lot of times personal lives and your corporate life mix, and attackers will find those social media profiles, figure out where you work, and then try to target you there. So now it's time for a little bit of story, get into some stories here. So one of my favorite stories is a password reset prompt and how it hurt a company. So what we did is this company hired us. They said, hey, we want you to try to break in. We want you to guess people's passwords. And what we did is I said, all right, well, I went on social media, and it was a bank, and I looked up employees that worked at the bank. It was a rather large bank. And one of the things we'll do is I like to find young college graduates that just start working at the bank. And because young college graduates like to post on social media. So I can go on social media and probably find a lot of information about this person. What I found is that when I put in this person's email address into a password reset prompt on the company website, it said in order to reset your password, or in order to gain your password, you have to answer 2 of these 3 questions. The questions are, what's the name of your favorite pet? What's your favorite superhero? And what's your favorite sports team? And I said, these are very doable or very obtainable answers that we can get on someone's LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter. So the person's name was Lindsay Walsh. Went on Facebook, typed in Lindsay Walsh at Acme Bank. Her profile popped up. And the next thing I did is I said, all right, well, let's start looking through the pictures. And I stumbled across this gem. And the reason why this picture was so great is because the caption of it was, hanging with my pal Spike, #Roll Tide. So if we remember back to the questions, 2 of the questions here was, what's the name of your favorite pet? Right. Well, we know our dog's name is Spike, so let's throw Spike in there. What's your favorite sports team? Now, I'm not, a sports expert, but I would guess that if you dress your dog up in an Alabama jersey, your favorite sports team is probably Alabama. I mean, I dress Duke up in a Syracuse handkerchief. I'm a big Syracuse University guy, and they're my favorite sports team. So just using that logic there, I was able to figure out that was our favorite sports team. Hit remind me, and this prompt came up. Your password is Spike Rocks 19. So using social media, right, we were able to figure out the answer to the security questions and then reset her password, or at least in this case, get her password, because the system was not the most enterprise or robust system in the world. So what are lessons we learned here? Lesson 1, do not put everything you've done in your entire life on social media. We see this all the time, right? Second, don't use easily guessable security phrases. So the way that I like to approach security phrases, I just use them as additional passwords. So if it's like, what's the name of your favorite pet? It'll just be a long random string of letters and numbers. I know a lot of other people that do that. I know some people that will actually use different answers to the question. So like, what's the name of your favorite pet? They'll put like their mother's maiden name plus their kid's name, right? They'll just treat it like different phrases to really keep it to keep it random and not guessable. Second is using 2-factor authentication. This is so important. We see this happen all the time. A lot of the times we get in externally, 2FA would have prevented it. And this isn't just from a corporate perspective. Use 2FA on everything. Personal, your personal bank, your personal social media. Make sure 2FA is enabled. The second thing is different password reset procedures. In this case, right, having a social media easily guessable question, reset a user's password, probably not the most secure thing in the world. So there's tons of different enterprise password reset procedures that we've seen that we recommend. Story 2. So this was a big hospital. I can't tell you the name, so I use Cleveland Clinic as an example. And they said, we want you to try to actually compromise patient data, so medical records of patients. And we sat at the drawing board and we were talking about it. I'm like, how are we going to do this? And we found out something that was pretty clever, and it was based on research of a local hospital that actually got hacked. So we'll just replicate that, figure it out, and see what happens. So what we did is we went on Facebook and we started looking at reviews of the Cleveland Clinic. And this is something that plagues a lot of business owners is, in businesses, is that their business allows reviews. Well, if it's something, especially if it's a company that handles sensitive information, collections companies, billing companies, credit unions, banks, if you allow people to review your bank or your service, especially like this one right here, they're sharing a ton of information about themselves. So this guy, Ken Flass, left a 5-star review on Cleveland Clinic. Clearly, he loves Cleveland Clinic, right? He's been coming there since February of 2016. Now I know when he first started coming there. Everyone from the desk, from the nurses, Dr. Keough himself were excellent. Now I know the doctor he sees. It's the best in the country. I come from Sharon, Pennsylvania. Now I know where he lives, right? He just gave me a ton of information that me as an attacker can use to compromise his data. So what we did is we found Dr. Keough, the doctor, and we found his nurse and his right-hand lady there, Katie Cruz. And we said, all right, well, what we're going to do is we're going to exploit the relationship between Dr. Keough and Dr. Cruz. And we sent Dr. Cruz an email as Dr. Keough, and we used all of Ken Flass's personal information. So this screenshot right here just came up. This is a website called Spokio. It's basically white pages on steroids. And we looked up Ken Flass. We found his cell phone numbers, his address, his relatives, a bunch of information just on the internet about Ken. And the next step was to formulate our email. So we emailed Dr. Keough's PA and said, hey, I'm out of the office. Ken Flass called. He needs he needs us to forward medical records to this office. Can you do this for us? We sent it from a fake domain, clevelandclinic.email, not clevelandclinic.com. And Katie Cruz responded and she said, sure thing, doc. And the next thing you know, she sent us his medical records in an email, in plain text, no encryption, right to where we told him to go. We tried this on 3 different PAs. One of them, and we said, let's do 3 different mediums. We'll do email, shoot us an email, we'll do fax, and the other one we'll do a secure upload. And all 3 times they did it. The fax one was crazy because it was like 2021 and no one really has fax machines anymore. So I do this online fax service and they sent it and there was issues and they worked through the issues to actually get it to send. So they actually had to send it like 3 times before it worked. So I got them 3 different times on that one. That was the 3 birds with 1 stone trick there. But yeah, so not good there. Lessons learned for that. Well, again, don't put everything on social media, right? If you are a Ken Flass and you're reviewing places, be careful of what you're reviewing and be careful of how much data you're sharing. In his case, he shared a lot of data that we could use or an attacker could use to then compromise his personal data. If you're a business owner, consider not having, this depends. I know restaurants obviously live and die by this, but consider not having Facebook reviews or social media reviews. Some of them do, hey, yeah, you can do 1 to 5 stars, but you can't actually leave comments. And at least monitoring, right? Especially if you're a bank, monitoring what people are saying. So if you see, Sharon Jones left this really lengthy review, well, yeah, it's great. It might be great publicity for you, for other people looking, but know that, okay, well, Sharon did this, so an attacker could be targeting her and targeting us and putting us in the crosshairs. They are using her data, which is something we see happen all the time. Educate employees on phishing and malicious threats. So there's a big employee awareness and education aspect of that story where we sent a fake email to an employee. They didn't know it was fake. They thought it was real. They clicked on it. Then they also sent us documents unencrypted, right? They weren't properly secured, which is a big red flag, especially if it contains things like health information, social security numbers, anything like that. So making sure you have an awareness program, not just we did it once, we're good to go. No, a program where you're doing it at least annually. It's part of your employee onboarding process. It's a formal thing that every employee has to do. That's what we recommend. Just like, sexual harassment training, employee awareness training, phishing, security training should be in the same program or platform or learning management system as those. And that's really important. All right. So switching gears a little bit, I need to talk about passwords because, I don't hear it a whole lot now, but, in the past 2 years, we do work for an organization, and I'd say, hey, your password policy is 8 characters. It's got to be longer than that. And, you can't be using 8-character passwords. And they're like, well, if you Google it and best practices on Microsoft says 8's great. I'm telling you right now, just because you're compliant doesn't mean you're secure. There's tons of companies that I've worked with, and there's tons of companies out there that get breached. And guess what? They're compliant. They're fully compliant with HIPAA, with the FDIC, with whatever government bodies can, auditing them, but they're not secure. So do not confuse compliance with security. If we look at an 8-character password or something that falls within Windows max password complexity guidance, password 1, spring 20, spring 22, winter 22, winter 23, temp 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm telling you right now, when we guess user passwords, winter 22, winter 23 is at the top of the list. And if we're doing 100 people, at least 3 people are using that password if it's an 8-character password policy. So don't be fooled by the, oh, we're compliant, we're secure trick. Make sure that, and we recommend 14-character password policy. Everyone has to have at least 14 characters. And it has to be a phrase, right? So instead of Blue House 1, I live in a blue house on Maple Street 1, right? It, in my opinion, just as easy to remember, but the chance of an attacker gaining that password or guessing that password are pretty slim. The other thing we see a lot of is what's called password reuse. So, I tell everyone, hey, use a really good password. Well, people think long and hard. They go to sleep at night. They wake up in the morning, they go, I got the greatest password. 40-character password, right? Some song lyric, no one's going to guess it. But the password's so dang good that they say, I'm going to use it for everything, right? I got this one great password. Why wouldn't I use it for everything? Well, if you have one key and one lock you like really well, do you use it for every single lock that you own? No. So you have to use different passwords for everything. The attack is called password reuse. And the issue that we see is that there's different sites, different databases, different companies that get breached every single day. Hackers, yeah, they want to gain money from that place. What they also want to do is they want to sell your credentials. So I heard it all the time in 2012 when LinkedIn got hacked. People said, oh, I don't care. I don't even use my LinkedIn. Oh, Twitter got hacked. I don't even use my Twitter. I don't care. Well, you shouldn't be caring about your Twitter. You should be caring about the password that you're using for your Twitter and where else it's being used. So there's sites. This was WeLeak Info. The new one, this one got shut down by the feds last year, so it's null and void. But there's new ones like IntelX and dhash.com where you can go in and enter a domain. So if let's say I want to target users, at Tesla, I can put tesla.com in there, and it'll come back with hundreds of results of people with tesla.com email addresses and their password that might have been used at LinkedIn or Twitter or Ashley Madison. But the thing hackers bank on is, well, if you use that password for Twitter, you're probably using it for your Tesla email or your Tesla VPN or a cloud sharing service or your personal bank account. And a lot of times people are using that same password for a lot of different services. And this is, when we look at what causes breaches and when we get calls from people that get breached, number 1 cause is phishing. Number 2 is this right here, password reuse. And it's always entertaining because I'll be on the phone with the customer and I'll be like, what's the email? Like, it was John Smith at Acme Bank. I go, John next to you yet? Was John's password Fido22? It was. How'd you know that? You just go to this breach database and look it up and you can find it. So then they'll try to log into things, right? If you get the password VPN portals, that's something that allows the attacker to gain network access to your corporate network. Mail portals, right? So they'll try to go through your mail. A lot of times people are sending and receiving documents in plain text that should probably be encrypted. So bank information, tax information, right? Those are all things attackers want to get. We've seen it time and time again where people will email themselves passwords. So they'll have I'll get an email like, oh, I wonder what the password to Salesforce is. And I'll just type Salesforce and I'll be like, they'll email themselves their Salesforce password. So now I have their Salesforce password. Dropbox, cloud services, right? Anything and everything is where attackers are going to try to use those credentials. And there's actually scripts now. I can't think of the name. It was by a security researcher, but he wrote a script that where if you have a set of credentials, you just enter it into the script, into the program, and they'll try to log into every single cloud service out there. So, and that's what attackers are doing, is they'll just load up credentials, spray them everywhere. If it works one place, that's probably going to be a payday for them. So what are the lessons we learned here? Well, first and foremost, use passphrases instead of passwords, right? Don't use winner22. Don't use password1. Don't use the name of your company 20, right? Use a phrase, use something secure. Use two-factor everywhere. Anywhere and anywhere, use two-factor. Basically, anything worth logging into these days is going to support it. Why not use it? Another thing I want to note in this presentation is if you use two-factor, I recommend using an app like Duo or Okta, or I think there's like Google Authenticator now if you're an Android user. But we recommend doing that. It's just a little bit more convenient than getting blown up with 900 different text messages from different two-factor providers and different services. So a little bit easier to manage. Oh, did Duke bark? I don't think he did. I think we escaped the Duke bark. I don't know. I got headphones on. I can't hear him. You guys could tell me. All right. So once we gain access, how do we gain admin access? Well, there's a couple different ways we'll do this, but the most common way is abusing privilege. So I'm doing a test right now. It's a small business. There's a HR manager. For whatever reason, the HR manager has administrative access over every machine on the network. This is really common in small businesses where they'll set the network up and they're like, well, we don't know who needs access to what. We're just gonna give everyone admin access. You don't want to do that. Abusing different trust relationships. So this means like maybe someone in HR might have administrative access over a subordinate or an employee. Probably not the greatest thing in the world. Misconfigurations and patching. A lot of companies have computers, systems, devices that they'll buy, they'll implement, and they'll forget about, and they won't patch them. They won't update them. They'll be misconfigured. If an attacker gains network access, those are some of the first things that will be exploited. We saw big time in 2017, the WannaCry vulnerability. I still, that was what, 6 years ago now, 5 years ago now, maybe, I don't know, longer than that. I'll log into networks, and almost on every network I see, I'll see that vulnerability on there from 2017. We'll see vulnerabilities from 2008 on networks sometimes. And the story is the same. Like, we have a hard time patching. Like, the patches fail. We don't audit. We don't have the resources, right? And that's when you need to work with somebody who can help you configure and help you patch and help you do all those things to make sure that your infrastructure isn't remaining vulnerable. So once we gain admin access, right? Well, this is one of the biggest kill chains we'll do, and I've seen this all the time, and I hear this story all the time where, Lisa Smith in HR, she's using QuickBooks, or maybe she's in accounts payable, and her password is the super secure password of password20 with a capital P though, right? So it's way more secure. And she puts in a service ticket and she says, I need access to QuickBooks. I'm trying to do this function. It keeps saying that I need elevated privilege. I do it 85 times a day. It's so annoying. Can you help me, please? And the poor guy on the other end goes, you know what, Lisa, I'm sorry. You put in all these tickets. I'm just going to give you administrative access over the machine. Now you won't ever have to enter that password. And again, you won't ever have to, you're going to have access to anything you want. Now Lisa's really happy. Now Lisa can access QuickBooks. She can also install The Sims 4. She can watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians. She can do anything and everything that her heart desires on that computer, which is great for Lisa. The problem is that's really bad for the company, because you know what else she can run as administrator? Malware. And you don't want malware. Malware is bad, right? It's one thing if you run malware as a regular user. That means that the attacker gains instant access as a regular user, which can be combated. If you run malware as an admin, that attacker now has instant administrative access to that machine. That's when really bad things can happen really, really fast. And it's a lot harder to diagnose those issues than if it's a regular user. Just kind of recapping a full kill chain now that we have all of these different ways hackers can gain access to networks is you can guess passwords, right? Because Julie Smith is using a really bad password. Now that we're in as an admin, we can now use different tools. This one's got a really funny name. It's called Mimicat, but this allows an attacker to gain more credentials. So maybe I'm Julie Smith in accounts payable and Mimicat. I can run this now because I'm an administrator on our computer. Well, now I have an admin account, or I have a service account, or I have, the CEO of the company's account. And this is basically what it looks like in the Mimicat's console. If anyone's like a aspiring pen tester, and if you have a lab environment, I highly recommend doing these types of exercises because they're really, really important, especially just understanding how it works. And once you gain that, I mean, you're good to go. There's not a whole lot more you need to do once you gain administrative credentials or passwords. So pretty easy to perform. And like I said, we do this stuff every single day. The impact's huge. How are we doing on time? We're doing good. Misconfigurations and bad patching. This is, from an initial access standpoint, from a how is an attacker initially going to get into your network? It's more uncommon than phishing and some of the other attacks we already went over, but it still happens. One of the biggest ones that we saw being exploited, this was a couple years back, was a Fortinet exploit. So Fortinet's a firewall that sits on your network. It's supposed to protect all your endpoints and your network. And the actual device that was protecting networks had a really bad vulnerability. And it was wrote about in 2019. That's when they initially discovered it. It didn't really make rounds from a mass attack perspective till 2020. But the crazy part was how easy this is to exploit. All you need to exploit this is an internet connection in Google. The reason for that is because it had what's called a local file inclusion vulnerability, super easy to exploit. And all you got to do is you go to a web endpoint, you type in, basically, I'll show you the URL here, this little in the bottom right, in URL remote login. Once you type that into your browser and you find a vulnerable endpoint, you can exploit it. I used to show how to do this, and then someone yelled at me because like, well, I did it and I found all this sensitive stuff. I'm like, yeah, because it's easy. So I don't do it anymore. But if you're interested, you can email me and I will show you how to exploit this, or you can just Google it, right? Google will do it too. So once you exploit this stuff and once attackers find all this sensitive data, where does the data go? Well, the easy one is it goes on the internet. Maze, this is a site called Maze, a ransomware group. What these guys do is they hack people, they take their data and they say, hey, Andrew Cross and Co., if you want your data back and you want your machines to be unlocked, you're going to pay us $1 million. Oh, and by the way, if you don't want us to post all your data on our website so that every person in the world has access to your customer information, that's going to be another $1 million. And I'll never forget when I first heard about this, this ransom type attack, because it was Christmas Eve. I got a call from a customer. He was at his Christmas party and he said, hey, James, I got a question. All these machines are getting locked up. I'm at the party. I just went back to the office. And we got infected with this thing called Maze. Have you ever heard of it? And I'm like, oh no, God. Because this was like the most lethal attack at the time. First time personally I ever dealt with it. And they got locked up. They ended up saying, you know what, we don't need to pay because we have backups. So they installed their backups, 2 days old, not a big deal. And I'm like, well, what about they're going to publish your data? He's like, they won't publish our data. They won't do that. They're all talk. It's $1 million. We're not paying them. They're not going to publish it. Oh, they published it. They didn't just publish it. They emailed all the local news outlets and their auditors and said, hey, just so you know, these guys got hacked. Here's proof that they got hacked. Here's all their data on our website. And you don't want that to happen. So you don't want to taunt these guys. The funny part about this is like they have a legit customer service chat. So when you get hacked, it's like a service desk. You go to the service desk. It's like, what's your identifier? They give you a number. You enter it in, like, how can we help you? Like, hey, I got hacked. You want $1 million? Can we negotiate? And they're like, yeah, we'll do $750,000, but you got to pay by tomorrow, right? And they'll go back and forth. It's like, I've been on a lot of help desk calls in my life, and this rivals Microsoft. Like, this rivals some of the best of the best, like the Apple support. They're like Apple geniuses, but they live in Russia and they work in basements. Like, they're very, very helpful. And here's another example of some of the stuff that they'll post. But yeah, these are guys, I don't think they're still active. I think a lot of these guys, they're defunct now, but they went to like Conti and Lockbit, some of the other ransomware outfits out there, but very much the attack is still there. Where else is it sold? Dark web marketplaces. I got a really good story. I don't know if Ted ever told the story, but so there's, when people get breached, what hackers will do is they'll sell social security numbers. So there was one site in the Cameroons. I don't even know where the Cameroons is, but that's where the server was located. You could go to it and you could buy anyone's social security number. And what I found is that if you're over the age of like 35, 40, your social security number is being sold on this site. And there's a bunch of iterations of it, of the site, because it keeps getting taken down. It's always going to exist either on the dark web or in servers in foreign countries. But it's like $1.50 to buy a social. So you can go on here. You can see in the top right, I have $2.11 on my account. I can go in and buy someone's social for $1.50. The crazy part is if I buy Ted's social security number for $1.50, well, someone else can buy it, but because it's used now, it's only 75 cents, right? It's 50% off. It's like the Black Friday sale for social security numbers, where anyone go in and buy it at a discount rate. I was doing a presentation. This was in a big city. It was I was the keynote speaker, and I was doing a presentation similar to this. But they said, we want you to buy someone's social security number live. Like, we want you to show us how it's done. So I bought the mayor's social security number live in front of everyone. And after the presentation, I'm like, I don't know if that was the brightest thing in the world to do. But yeah, I mean, you just go in here, click 3 buttons, and plain as day is the social security number. It's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. But yeah, and this is where like a lot of that stuff goes. I can tell you, if you don't think your social security number has been breached, I can almost guarantee you it is. Like, you can go in here and search it up. Like, it's very, very scary. It's very frightening. But this is where that stuff goes. How easy is it to access? Dangerously easy. All right, on the left here, I took this screenshot last week. This was called Clop Leaks and Play Ransomware. These were some of their most recent victims. You can use the Tor browser, which is basically Firefox for the dark web. Fire this up, and it'll tell you who got breached. And the funny part is it'll tell you how many days before they're going to publish it. So if they breach you, they give you 5 days to pay before they publish it. And then, like Create a Farm down there in the middle from Athens, Greece. Actually, there's an IT services company too, Opus IT Services in Singapore. If those are published, you just click that link, and on the right, I have a different, I have a machine that I use specifically to analyze some of these breaches. That's a screenshot of the download. So you can see this was all credit reports from the venture capitalists that wanted to invest in the company. So we're going to run a credit report. Some of that information had social security numbers, a lot of sensitive data, but all you need is really a web browser and a machine to look at the data on, and you can download it. Very scary stuff. All right, right on time, Ted. So that's the How I Would Hack You series for today. Ted, I'll hand it off back to you.
Okay, well, thank you, James. I mean, I think as everybody saw, there's many ways to be hacked and exploited. And, James just shared today, just a small sampling really of some of the different ways. So what we want to do now is take your questions. So there's a couple questions already in queue. I want to encourage everyone to go in and submit your questions, but I just want to make a couple comments. Today on today's webinar, we have a combination of SnapTech IT clients, and we have companies from all over the United States who are interested in potentially partnering with a managed service provider. I mean, I think hopefully there's a lot of just really personal best practices that everybody could take from James's talk today in terms of eliminating password reuse, using a password locker so that you can have unique passwords for all of the different services you're on. Make sure you're activating two-factor or multi-factor authentication on everything in your personal life. Make sure you as a company leader are making sure that MFA is deployed to everything in your company environment and all your critical systems and software tools. So those are some just really really important and next steps that everybody can take. But I think the other thing that I think maybe just jumps out at everybody when you see this talk is this is a little frightening when you see this talk. I've now hosted this webinar with James several times, so he always adds in new material, so there's always new stories for me to enjoy. But it's pretty frightening when you hear a series of stories like this, because you just realize how complex the world is, how complex our companies have become. We have online lives, we have all this data floating out on the internet, our companies are connected to all these systems, and our companies are connected to cyber criminals all over the world. And so it can be a little daunting when you kind of try to absorb the import of this whole of all these stories and the reality of it. So what can you do? So we've already talked about some things you can do as an individual or as a company leader, but the other thing you can do as a company leader is make sure you're taking cybersecurity really seriously and using cybersecurity assessments as a way to figure out where you may have gaps or vulnerabilities in your current approach to things. I mean, there's a lot of companies that have gotten to a certain level of maturity, but maybe they took the foot off the gas, or maybe they got lazy, and there's always new problems that crop up. So you have to be continuously raising the bar on your own organization on the cybersecurity front. And a really good, very mature organizations are consistently doing assessments on their own environment, number one, hiring pen testers like James to come in and to be an ethical hacker and try to probe and find vulnerabilities or other aspects of their controls that can be exploited. But a lot of companies out there today just simply aren't doing enough with systematically looking at their own environment. And so when we're either talking to a potential new client or consistently with our existing clients, we always do a cybersecurity and technology assessment as a core part of our process. So any company that is looking for managed services from a company like SnapTech IT, we start out the relationship with a paid engagement where we will have engineers do a top to bottom cybersecurity assessment on the client environment. And then as a part of our managed service offering, we will then do that consistently, usually on an annual basis with our managed clients. And that's just a really important part of managing your technology environment, managing your cybersecurity, because you have to do everything that James mentioned in terms of best practices, but you also need to take proactive measures as an organization to make sure that you're consistently raising the bar on your own cybersecurity. So if you enjoyed today's webinar and you're interested in talking to SnapTech IT, please engage with our sales folks when they call and ask about, are you curious about what a cybersecurity assessment might be like and what's involved with it. But let's now take your questions, and we have a couple minutes. We have a couple minutes for questions, so let's get into it. Okay, so I saw a good one from Tatiana, I think. So James, let's throw this one out there. Are there any security concerns or tips for managing a company's social media presence or profile?
Yeah, I mean depending on the vertical, right? It could be different. Like if you're a restaurant, for example, kind of like I alluded to in the presentation, it's going to be different than if you're a bank or a hospital or something that controls or has somewhere sensitive information. So you just got to be vigilant in terms of like figuring out who are like let's say you're a hospital, who's reviewing, right? Like we saw in the Cleveland Clinic example, a guy reviewed it and he left a ton of personal information on there. You should be screening for that, and then if you see that stuff, deleting it or messaging him, hey, can you remove the comment? And I don't know can you remove the words, right? Maybe you want the rating still because it's a nice 5-star for you, but having them edit it to remove that information. It's not uncommon now that we see businesses, especially banks and hospitals and credit unions, who just say, just don't allow reviews, or allow reviews but just stars with no comments or information. Because people are like, banks are a great example. People will say that they went into this branch and spoke with Kathy, who was the loan manager, and they got a loan for a 2008 Toyota Camry, right? All that stuff is still information that an attacker can use. So screening that is really important.
Okay, and then this is kind of just a technical one, but Ryan wants to know, are there any cutting edge protections for company data sets to prevent data exfiltration?
Ooh, good one. Cutting edge. There's some good stuff out there. I don't know if we would, I mean, like I've seen like Palo Alto's got some good stuff. Really when we talk about like data exfil, any kind of firewall solution, I think it's called like Panorama, or I can't really remember it. But there's any enterprise firewall is going to have add-ons for that. I think Cisco's got AMP. But really, what I try to have people focus on is like, well, how are they exfilling data? They're exfilling data because they compromise an endpoint. And a lot of people are hyper focused on like, I need to protect the network. Like the network is going to get hacked. Your network doesn't magically get hacked, right? The Ethernet cables don't start oozing. It's the endpoints that get hacked. So protecting the endpoints is really important, because if you can protect your endpoints, right? If your endpoint doesn't get hacked in the first place, if you have good EDR, managed SOC, XDR, right? Then, if no one can get in the endpoint, then they can't get the data and they can't exfil that data out through the network. The network monitoring is really secondary, in my opinion, to having really solid endpoint hardening and endpoint configuration, having the right products in place for that.
Yeah, and I think I mean, you threw out a couple acronyms that our audience may or may not know, but I mean, I think one of the things that XDR and EDR, there's a whole category of security services that are looking for anomalous behaviors. So if you talk about like next gen antivirus, it's usually next gen antivirus with XDR or with EDR, or MDR, managed detection and response. And the reality is today, you know, there's some people who talk about like assume breach. Like a healthy principle with cybersecurity is to assume the bad guys are going to get in to maybe one endpoint. But what you want to do is you want to kind of quarantine the threat actor and circumscribe what they can get to and where they can move, and then so you can go kick them out before they can do really bad damage or exfiltrate a lot of data. So a lot of today's security solutions, and this is something that SnapTech definitely does for a lot of our clients, is you have a security operations center that's using technologies that are looking for anomalous behaviors inside a network. So if there is a breach, the key thing you want to do is be able to rapidly respond and kick the bad guys out before they can do a lot of damage, or where they can like laterally move to different parts of the network and maybe potentially discover mass data that can be exfiltrated.
Yep. Yeah.
So,
And to add to that, like one thing that's really important is, that we'll see all the time is when we'll go into places, they might have like maybe their Outlook got compromised, their endpoint configuration was good, but they won't have great logging. So it's like, well, from an IR incident response perspective, it's hard for anyone to go in there and figure out what happened if you don't have great logging or centralized logging and things like that. So that's where all that stuff comes into play. And for like a one man person to do SOC, to do alerting, to do security operations center, to do alerting, to do monitoring, that's a pretty big task. And we recommend, especially if you're a small business, to outsource that or look at some kind of managed solution where you have a team of people helping you do that.
That's right. I mean, that's a really good point about logging. So, another, more acronym soup here, but alphabet soup, but security, incident, and event management, SIM. So sometimes you see that term thrown about, but a SIM solution is a solution that's going to gather all that logging information. But the logging is like a double-edged sword, like James mentioned. The problem is you generate a lot of logs. Now you've collected all the log data. You need somebody who's super smart and who's on the ball to actually then respond and be able to interpret what's in the logs to actually then take action and respond. And again, a managed service provider that's a specialist in cybersecurity like SnapTech IT, we manage our own SOC. We partner with third-party SOC environments, and we can rapidly respond to information, and we know how to basically digest all that log data and be able to take action based upon what we discover in the logs. So, let's go back to the Q&A log. I always tell people, James, that you make cybersecurity funny. and one of our viewers said they were laughing out loud as you were talking about sharing the mayor's social security number in the public forum. So you got somebody laughing.
That's good. That's one of my goals.
But let's see here. So let's take Mark's question. It says, in relation to this webinar, can James talk about his feelings on the new FTC safeguards rules starting June 9th? And maybe that's something you know about, James. I don't know. Is this a game changer to help out? Is it not going to do much against cyber attacks? So,
good question. So, I mean, we've been working with a lot of like investment firms and RIA firms and advisories and clearing houses that have to comply with that. Is it a game changer? I don't think so. The main reason for that is because there's no teeth, right? I mean, you know, you're never going to have everyone comply until there's an actual audit function, until you actually have to submit a report, which I don't believe there's a formal process for that yet. It's basically optional. It's elected, right? Yeah, you should be doing it, but whether everyone does it or not, that's on the leadership and the executive management at that company. And this is something we see a lot of, like in New York State, we have the DFS, and the DFS has their own set of cybersecurity requirements. And I'll go into a investment advisory firm and say, hey, you got to comply with this. And I'm like, yeah, we know, but we're just not going to do it. They basically treat it as optional. So yeah, it's I've read the safeguards requirement. It's good. And I know pen testing is part of that, and two-factor authentication, a lot of stuff. It seems basic, but from a fundamental security level, if every single customer that I've ever encountered, every single organization had that enabled, it would severely limit and decrease the amount of breaches that we see. So it's a good start. If you're using that as like a framework to build your program, that's good there. But eventually a lot of our clients will graduate to like NIST and different cybersecurity frameworks that are a little bit more robust, and it depends on your vertical and your size and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the good news about compliance mandates, and there's many of them. There's compliance mandates for investment advisors and banks, credit unions, medical. HIPAA governs medical associations. The Department of Defense regulates defense contractors and manufacturers. All of these compliance mandates are healthy because they raise the bar and they set a standard with especially cybersecurity controls that companies should comply with. The challenge is there's a lot of like self-attestation and self-assessment mechanisms. So at the end of the day, people can tell white lies, people can kind of phone it in, people can kind of gloss over reality. And I think, as you saw from today's discussion, is that you can't just approach cybersecurity from a compliance mindset and try to check a bunch of boxes just to jump through the hoops because the government or trade association is requiring you to do it. You better take it all very seriously and really endeavor to put in place genuine cybersecurity controls, genuine culture of security in your organization, genuine employee education. Because if you don't, you can be clearly a victim if you just take a compliant-based approach exclusively.
Yeah, and if you want to take like a check the box type approach, like, oh yeah, I'm just doing this to check this box, that's really where the bad, and that's more of a culture thing, right? It's like we're more concerned about complying with this questionnaire, checking this box, than we are about the actual security of our organization. And typically we, if someone's like, yeah, I just want a pen test to check a box, I'm like, we're probably not a good fit for you, because we go beyond that. And that's, you want to graduate to that level of seriousness with cybersecurity where it's a fundamental part of your organization.
Right. So James, I mean, I think you shared with everybody today, how ethical hackers work and how pen testers do their work. If people wanted to get in touch with you, if they thought a pen test was something that they wanted to engage with you on, how would they do that?
Yeah, so you could reach out to us. There's a form on our website. You can email me. It's just james@hackitcyber.com. We can figure out, what your size is, what your vertical is, if there's any kind of, compliance framework that you need to be concerned about. And, we could scope something out that makes sense for, your size and your budget, and we could go from there.
Okay. And sometimes, I think the other dimension to thinking about cybersecurity is you know already maybe there's a lot of work you need to do. And sometimes the challenge is, do you have the technical expertise on staff? Do you have enough people to actually do the work? And that's really where partnering with a managed service provider comes in. Is we have the experts on staff. We have a deep technical bench. We have the staff who's expert at doing this work every day to keep organizations secure. And so that's the other opportunity everybody has. If you're interested in partnering with SnapTech IT and you would like to have a cybersecurity assessment, or just a discussion about how to take your technology in your organization to another level, please reach out to us. But with that, I think we're out of time. Thank you, everybody, for submitting some questions. and for engaging with us on the live event today. I want to thank James Carroll from Hack It Cyber for a very informative and humorous, at some levels, talk. So, James, thanks again for partnering with us and joining us on today's call.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Okay, and we look forward to having everybody join us on next month's SnapTech IT monthly webinar. We look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks a lot and have a great day.